Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about dynamic quest design. This is a question from Anubis1101 who asked on my tabletop role-playing vid. I would love to hear how you'd approach a Radiant quest system. You've mentioned it in passing, but your games have never made big use of them. How do you feel about them in general, and if you had to implement such a system, how would you bring it in line with Tim's style of game design? Okay, since Anubis is a super mutant, I'm filming this and jumping the queue. That's why it's light out here. I'm actually filming this in the afternoon for once. As for dynamic quest designs, he mentioned Radiant quest design. That's what they're called in Bethesda games. It's a type of dynamic quest design, which I'll describe. I like them, but they're very complicated. I would not have made this video until I made quite a number of other videos, which I will be mentioning as I go along. I highly recommend that you check those links because some of the things I'm going to talk about are going to assume you already know about quest stages and generated dialogue and things like that. So let's start with saying, what is a dynamic quest system? What is the Radiant quest system in Bethesda games? This is where the game dynamically generates quests for the player to do. You should probably take a look now at my video on quest implementation because I'm going to talk about quest stages from unknown and mentioned all the way through achieved and completed. A dynamic quest system usually themes the quest somehow. Maybe you're in the Thieves Guild, so you get quests from them to go steal things or do heists or something. Maybe you're in a particular faction. They will give you quests related to the faction to go do. Maybe you're in a particular town. They're going to give you quests that are related to the town. Now, these quests can have all different kinds of types, but the where you get that will probably theme those different types. Why would you want a dynamic quest system? Well, it effectively is a source of infinite quests, so people can just keep playing your game forever. If you combine it with respawning of areas with both creatures and loot, then you can basically have as much engagement with a game as you will ever want. It'll just keep on playing. So let's talk about how I would implement such a system. I'm going to talk about this. If I need an example, I'm going to use Arcanum. So I'm going to assume you know it just because when I give examples, I'm going to have to root it in a particular world, and I'm going to talk about the quest stages that we use in Arcanum. So let's start. I would say that the absolute easiest dynamic quest type to generate is find something. Basically, some NPC asks you to go find an item. You will generate the object. Usually it has a different type. It might be, it could be anything from a note to a book to a scroll to a sword to a shield. You will generate the description for it, which it might just be, Bob's sword, and you're being sent to go retrieve it from Bob. It might have something a lot more detailed than that. You will have to generate these, so you have to have a system that generates that description. And then you have to associate a model. That's probably based on the type. So if you pick a shield, you'll pick a shield model. If you pick a sword, you pick a sword model. But you will have to have a pool of those to pick from. You will then place it somewhere in the world. My recommendation is that you have helper data. I've talked about helper nodes when you're doing levels. Helper data is something similar, but it's not located in levels. It's probably a list somewhere the game keeps. It will indicate possible locations where items can be placed, NPCs that may be associated with that item, whether it's an NPC that cares about it or an NPC that is going to have it on their person or something like that. And also a level range for this kind of location NPC quest. So if you're, if the player is like level 14, you may pick from a list that includes 14 in the helper data. So you don't put like Bob tells you to find his sword and it's the bottom of some level 100 dungeon. So there's just no way you can go get it. So it'll help you put the sword or whatever your item you're going to go retrieve in some place that's appropriate. And then because the location is mentioned, if that area has already been found and cleared by the player, you will have to be able to respawn it. So there will be a respawn method that can be accessed by your dynamic quest system. So it has to respawn that area before you get there. Then you need to pick an NPC who wants it. the quest giver. And you're going to have to create their dialogue. I have a video on how I created generated dialogue in Arcanum, and I'll put the link below. Doing this for quests, there are ways of putting together text to have the person say something effective like, hey, I want you to find my insert item name here. If you agree, he's like, well, the last I heard, it was in this location, possibly in the possession of this NPC. At this point, the stage is either moved from unknown to mentioned, and if the player accepts it, it's moved to accepted. And then boom, they can go. This type of find an item dynamic quest is moved to achieve when the item is found and then completed when you go back to the quest giver and turn it in. There are a lot of really cool variants you can make on this. The NPC may actually use the item against you. He's just not carrying Bob's sword. He's going to use Bob's sword against you. And that's where you may find out that Bob's sword can shoot fireballs or stun people. That's a pretty good sword. Maybe you don't want to return that to Bob, or not right away. Anyway, it would be fun to see the NPC actually use the item against you. Another variant is you may be able to turn in a facsimile of Bob's sword. If Bob just tell you it's an old rusty longsword, but it belongs to my grandfather and the hilt looks like a lion, maybe you have sword crafting. Maybe you can forge something that would trick Bob into thinking it's his sword. I will talk about that in a few weeks because Anubis, you jumped the queue. I'm going to do a video on ways to recover from botched quests. There's a lot of other things you can do. I think finding items is the absolute easiest base level dynamic quest you can do. But there's a lot of other ones that I would consider. These are pretty standard quests. You find them in a lot of RPGs. And here's how I would do it in a dynamic quest system. One would be defending a location against an attack. Maybe there's a guild building. Maybe there's a whole town. Maybe it's just an item inside of a chest and you got to guard that chest. By the way, that last one is exactly something we did in the Soldier Path in WildStar. And in fact, the video I did on Bartle's different types of players, which I'll link below, would be an excellent guide for you to think of how to make dynamic quests. Because there's all kinds of different players and they want to do different things. And those lead to these different quest types. So the video is linked below. You would get a location defense quest from somebody appropriate, the guild leader, the town mayor. Maybe it's just a rich person and they're like, oh, I've heard thieves are coming tonight to try to steal my, tiara. I'm going to put it in this chest. You make sure it doesn't get stolen. At that point, the game will spawn the enemies at the right time. Maybe it's a bunch of bandits, maybe it's a bunch of thieves, maybe it's a bunch of zombies. And then, boom, the attack gets launched. The quest is achieved when all those enemies are killed. Another one, and I know some people are going to go, I don't like those, is escorting an NPC from location X to location Y. Yes, you might need to defend them along the way while you're taking them, either naturally, because it takes you through areas that are just naturally spawned with creatures and bad guys, or you may spawn an enemy along the way just to attack that NPC. Now, this may be because the NPC really wants to get to location Y and is in location X, and that way you can have somebody that's like, oh, it's you again. Yeah, now I need to go to this town. Or it may just be a way to get the players to learn the map. You may not... NPC... The goal of it isn't to necessarily take NPC to that new town. It's... An NPC may tell you he wants to go someplace new, and it's someplace that the game looks up you've never been to. So it's a great way for you to uncover locations on the map, because this NPC will go there and you will follow them. So they're not following you, you're following them. They're going to walk to this cave you've never heard of or this dungeon you've never heard of, and you're going to follow them there. The NPC is probably the quest giver, but not always. You may be maybe the parents that's saying, I want you to escort my child to this other town. Or it may be a guild leader saying, hey, I need you to take this person from the guild. He's our accountant. I need you to take him to this other town. It will be achieved on arrival when you get that person to that location, and then completed when you go back to the quest giver, who may be that person, and say, look, it's done. If you hate escort quests, this exact same structure could be used for FedEx quests, and that's where you have to take an item from location X to location Y, probably to turn into a particular person. Works very similarly. You still got to go to some new location, or maybe one you already know about, and give an NPC an item, either turning it in with him or going then back to the original and say, okay, I delivered the item. But escorts and FedEx are pretty much similar in how you would put them together in a dynamic quest system. Another one, which I like to think about, is harvest and crafting dynamic quests. This is kind of like finding a specific item, but you're not looking for a specific item. You're looking for a certain quantity of particular materials. Maybe these are things that you harvest out in the world, like something, a fruit from a plant or from a mining vein. It might be something that you have to like kill crocodiles and you're trying to get crocodile skins. Or it may be something that you have to craft. So you find ore and you smelt it into ingots, and that's what the person wants, is those ingots. Or it may be even something farther along than that. Like they want an apple pie, but you have to go get the apples. They don't have any apples. So you got to go get the apples, maybe buy flour or fine flour or steel flour. And then with your cooking skill, you make them an apple pie. It's achieved when it's crafted and then completed when you turn it in. This is a great dynamic quest for shopkeepers. You may go into a bakery and he's like, I didn't have time to make apple pies today. Go make me 10 apple pies. Or you may go to a shopkeeper and say, hey, my regular delivery of this thing hasn't arrived. If you can make me some of these, I will give you money. And then another type, this is kind of, I think, the last standard type, is exploring and reporting, where you basically are told to go somewhere, reach some location in it, and then come back and give a report to the NPC who sent you there. What's cool about this isn't so much that, like, hey, they want to send you somewhere and then you come back, but it's that you can generate dynamic quests based on specific skills that you detect that the player already has. Maybe there's going to be combat. Maybe you detect, this character, the player character, has really good combat skills. So you fill that area with combat. Maybe they are good at removing traps. So you generate traps and put it in there, and they have to make it buy all these traps and possibly disarm them. Maybe there's a lot of doors that need to be picked with lock picking. Maybe certain spells are required. Like maybe there's some dead body that the player will have to speak with dead on, and they have it. So that's why you put it in there. It's part of the report. You were supposed to, maybe they said, go to this area and talk to this person and bring me back what he told you. You go there and he's dead, but you have to speak with dead. Or it may just be that you have to stealth past some NPCs along the way, or maybe even listen to some dialogue they're saying. So if you go into combat with them, they won't say it. So the only way to overhear that dialogue is if you stealth close enough to hear it, but they don't detect you. All kinds of fun things can be done with explore and report style quests. It's achieved when you've gotten to that location and gotten the information for the report, and then of course you turn it in to complete it. Notice that this same building up of a location and spawning in particular things there also works great for being sent off to find an item or the harvest crafting thing. Just spawning an area with something particular to the player skills is a particularly good use of dynamic quest building. And then finally, I think the hardest thing to do in all of these, it's an element of all of these, but it's also a type, would be a dialogue-based dynamic quest. This is where I talk about AI would really help in these situations, because you could generate rather than regurgitate already written lines, especially if there's VO involved. I've got a whole video on how I think VO done through AI could eventually lead to a broader set of quests and more dynamic, reactionary RPGs. But I know a lot of people don't like that. I'm just saying it's a tool. Tools can be used in good ways and bad ways. That, I think, is a good way of using it. But you can also specifically make a dialogue-specific quest. How would that go? It would be something like this. You need to convince someone. It's probably the quest giver, but not always. You need to convince them of something. Maybe someone's tricking them. They're overcharging them for stuff, or they're giving them fake stuff. They're forging stuff. Hope it's not you. Or they're giving them things saying, these are expensive oranges from the southern region, and they're basically oranges from, one town over. Or you may have to convince them that enemy forces are gathering nearby. They're going to have to deal with it, which may lead then later to a defend this location. What it means, though, is you as the player have to go gather the evidence to prove it. This this evidence will be placed out there in the exact same way that the find an item for the find something quest worked. There may be notes or books. There may be materials. There may be weapons. Again, similar to the explore and report, you may overhear dialogue because you're using stealth. You finally can go back to the first NPC who has an entire generated dialogue tree, which includes skill checks, lines that have skill checks for dialogue skill checks, and lines that have the evidence tagged on them. So you can't say those lines unless your speech is good enough and you have found that evidence that you had to go out there and get. This would be a really interesting way of generating lots of dialogue related quests for a player to do. It's of course achieved when the NPC is finally actually I would say it's probably achieved when you gather all the evidence, and then completed when you convince the NPC using your skills. But that's the hardest one to do, and there's a lot of work to be done there. You have to have a very robust generated dialogue system. Anyway, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, and I'm glad you asked this question, Anubis1101.